Paul.
Thanks, Andy, and welcome to everybody along to the BMFA's very first question time. This has gone down particularly well, and as Andy's already said, we've had a huge amount of questions come through. So I'm not going to linger on the introductions too much and get straight into the bits that you guys want, which is answers to your questions. So just as a quick introduction, and hopefully you've managed to read the slides that Andy's put up for us for a start. But we have 4 representatives from the BMFA, 3 from the CAA, and 1 from the BMFA's insurance brokers. So first of all, we've got Ian Pallister, who is a fellow of the Society of Model Aeronautical Engineers and the BMFA's chairman. We've got Dave Phipps, the BMFA's CEO. We've got Manny Williamson, who is the BMFA's development officer and also the national centre manager. Then we've got Andy Simons, BMFA Club Support Officer, and is the new Power Nationals Coordinator. Then for the CEA, we've got Kevin Woolsey, who is the CEA's UAS Units Policy Lead. Then we've got Giancarlo, or Yanni as he's likes to be known, CEA's Operations Specialist within the UAS Policy Team. Then we've got James de Beauvoir Tupper, I hope I've got that right, the CEA's Operation Policy Specialist within the UAS Policy Team. And we've also got Tim Marshall, who is the BMFA's insurance broker representative. Okay, so let's get cracking, shall we? So as Andy says, there's been some really popular questions. So we're going to probably hit the most popular and the largest one for a start. So with question 1, and this will be aimed primarily at the CAA team, but at the end of each question, we'll also throw it open to other members that may not have been aimed at, see if they want to add anything further. So first question, what is the purpose and benefits of the registration scheme? Also, supplementary to that, why did our operator IDs change on renewal, and why do they have to be so long? Couldn't we just use a QR code? So over to you, gentlemen, at the CAA.
Okay, thanks very much for that introduction, Paul, and the first question. And before I dive into that, I'd just like to offer my thanks for this opportunity that Dave Phipps gave myself and the team to come along tonight. I think this is hopefully the first of many of these types of evenings. We're very happy to support these, and we hope it's going to be of some benefit. And we do really appreciate the opportunity to perhaps put a face to the CEA for everybody involved. So for the question then, which was about the registration scheme, the first part was about the purpose of the scheme. And really what this is about is an assurance of a baseline level of competence across the community. And of course, that community extends not only across modelers, but of course the unmanned aircraft fraternity as a whole. This gives us a database of everyone that we can contact with regard to any safety-based or related messages as well. There's an improved understanding of the industry we regulate as a result of this. And I think that really what I want to focus on primarily with regard to answering this particular purpose is that it's about establishing that baseline of education and the ability to communicate with that base as well. Needless to say, as I suspect I'll be saying a number of times this evening, this is not a CAA's decision to implement this this scheme. It's a requirement that the UK government has levied upon us via the DFT. But the baseline level of competence and the opportunity to educate, not obviously the target audience is not primarily the likes of the BMFA, but of course you'll appreciate there's a vast number of people out there flying unmanned aircraft who could benefit from the baseline level of competence. So obviously happy to take follow-up questions on that, but when taking on the component about the numbers, the length of the number, yeah, we were kind of surprised by that as well. However, this is set out in the regulation, which we have to comply with. It's not a CAA requirement. We've just put it out. This is standardized across Europe. And of course, this regulation was in force before the end of last year. When the transition period ended at the end of December, the UK retained in law the IR and the DR, and part of it was this. So it's standardized across Europe. Now, the good news about this, I've seen some comments about, hey, these numbers have changed, you know, this is a little bit inconvenient, you know, what am I going to have to, is this going to happen every year? The good news is, no, you're not going to have to do it every year. There's no plans for this to be something that is going to be changed every year. Now that you have got the European long version, that is the way it will remain. So hopefully you won't be scrolling things out. That's not the plan here. It's changed, and it only happened to change the way it did recently because it came to the end of the transition period, and we had to adopt that and that methodology. I think and why can't we use a QR code? That is specifically so it needs to be readable to the human eye. So that's the reason for that.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Kevin. Anybody else on the panel would like to respond to any of those questions or answers?
Yeah, just on the QR codes, I think in the acceptable means of compliance and guidance material that EASA produced to accompany the regs, they did say that QR codes could be used, but obviously the UK has decided not to adopt the acceptable means of compliance and guidance material. That's correct, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I might invite James to talk about that in particular, but I'm glad that you've mentioned about the EASA acceptable means of compliance, because we, the UK, have decided that we have got our own acceptable means of compliance, which we are using, which we're developing for the regulations, and that essentially, in a nutshell, is CAP 722 and the like. So you've got to be a little bit careful by looking at EASA acceptable means of compliance to those implementing regulations, because I know it's somewhat a statement of the obvious, but it's very tempting at times to look towards EASA when we're not a member of that anymore. So
yeah, I think the other issue that's cropped up in the UK is that for a police officer who ultimately will be the enforcer for the regulation, for them to read a QR code, they would need a device that would read it. And I think there was an issue from the police that they couldn't ask bobbies to use their own mobile devices. And they don't have a device as standard to read it. And if the argument being that if they needed a device to read a QR code, then the police should supply them with one.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not entirely sure, but I can well believe that that being the case. And you know, I hope most people on the call would agree that when it comes to making it as easy as possible for our colleagues in the police force to enforce the right compliance sort of behaviours, we need to make this as simple as possible. So I think that maybe not using a QR code is a way to that aim.
Okay, excellent. Right, let's move straight on to question number 2. And this is club related, so we'll pass this over to Andy. And this is coming from Peter Watson, who asks, is the CEA registration a mandatory requirement to be a member of an affiliated club? We have a minority group of members who say it is their choice and don't want to be a member of the CAA. These members will potentially leave the club if this is so, but will continue to fly at another venue.
Thanks, Paul. The short answer to the first part there is no, it's not a mandatory requirement to be a member of an affiliated club. Not every member needs to be registered for the scheme. They may not fly an aircraft that requires it. However, if you do fly an aircraft that requires it, it is a mandatory requirement if you want to be lawful. And on the club, a club will be expecting all the members to fly lawfully, just like you do with other aspects of the regulations. And generally, as a club, you would take action against a member that's not flying lawfully. So no, not mandatory to be a member of the club. But if they're flying an aircraft that requires it, it is mandatory to be lawful. So it's a fairly short answer, is that one?
I think, I don't know if Tim's got anything to comment on this, but certainly our new insurer takes the view that people should be registered. If you know, you've got to be registered if you're required to be registered. Do you want to say anything on that, Tim?
Yeah. So yeah, that's a clear understanding. So this year we've changed insurers from MS Hamlin, who we've been with for I think nearly 8, maybe 9 years. We would have liked to have stayed with MS Hamlin, but MS Hamlin have withdrawn from the casualty market within the UK. So myself and Dave have been involved with insurers probably for the last 6 to 8 months to try and find a replacement insurer. We think we found a very good insurer in Hiscox. I don't think anything's changed actually from the point of view of Hiscox's view compared to the view that MS Hamlin took. Both insurers were very much of the opinion that they would only cover lawful flying, and obviously since Damaras has come into play, insurers have been very much of the opinion that where required, all members do need to comply and be registered. So, and I think that probably will sort of lead on to the next question. But yeah, it is a requirement. If you are required to register, insurers expect that to be the case. I think the only thing that we can say is that I don't think that the BMFA have mandated that it's compulsory. The BMFA can only provide guidance on that. Is that correct, Dave?
Yeah, essentially.
Okay, right. Question 3. And again, this is insurance based, so we'll throw this over to Tim initially. And this question comes from a gentleman called Ray Wells. Ray asks, are there any circumstances in which our insurers would reject to cover a claim against a member because the member had either intentionally or accidentally breached Article 16 or any other legislation, or by any other law, or was flying on private land, albeit open access, where there was no explicit permission from the landowner to fly?
Okay. I think this comes back to a little bit to the previous question. So it's not a requirement of the policy, but insurers are working on the basis that they are covering lawful flying only. So obviously, if somebody's intentionally breaching any CAA requirements, DFT requirements, or breaching Article 16, that wouldn't be picked up by the policy. It's very clear that they're not covering any intentional unlawful acts. From the point of view of any accidentally breaching of any lawful act, that is covered by the policy, because obviously nobody's gone out of the way to actually break the law. If you start off with the intention of flying correctly and for some reason end up in a situation where you're not flying legally, we wouldn't expect insurers to come back and decline a claim on that basis. As regards flying on private land where there was no explicit permission, again, from my point of view, if it's open access and under the CAA regulations you're allowed to fly in that area, I wouldn't see that being a problem either.
Okay, thank you very much, Tim. Anybody else want to add to that?
Just on the open access land, there isn't actually a specific prohibition of model aircraft flying on open access land. And we do have quite a few sites and clubs that are using open access land without any problems at all.
Okay, thanks for clarification there, Andy. Okay, move on to question 4. And this one relates to the BMFA structure. So we're going to pass this over to Ian, our chairman. And this question comes from Dave Durford. And Dave asks, ordinary club members are not very interested in attending meetings, but still would like a say or at least a vote on BMFA matters. Why can't individual club members vote directly on issues? Why are the area representatives, who really don't represent them, but submits a block vote on behalf of the clubs in the area? Most, if not all, ordinary club members are not interested in BMFA area meetings.
Okay, thank you, Paul, and good evening, everyone. Relatively simple looking question, but it actually touches on several areas, and it goes right to the root of our organisation. 3 separate issues. The first one is whether individual members should have a direct vote. And then secondly, it looks at why area delegates have a block vote on behalf of clubs. But it raises the question, why are those members not interested, or clubs not interested in attending their area meetings? And that's something which we've been looking at very closely. And one of the main reasons for the recent survey was on behalf of the areas to look at what is it that clubs and members expect of their area, and what can areas do to become more interactive. And the third issue, and this relates to a question that came in also from John Lawton, and that is whether the council is, and the directors, the number of directors is actually too big to be effective, because as the question alludes to there, each area delegate is a director of the company. And I say the company because the BMFA is a registered company, a limited company, and all of those issues stem from our Articles of Association, which is the document, it's a formal document that outlines the restrictions relating to the way that the company is managed and funded and governed. And the only way that can be changed is by a vote, or a majority vote of the members. And in this case, the members are the clubs. So it's only the individual club that has a vote at the AGM. It's a question that's been raised before, and it's related to this, is whether country members should be allowed to vote, because country members obviously aren't a member of a club. And that's something that we are starting to address in our strategic review. We started looking at the strategy, the whole organisation just over a year ago, just before the first lockdown, and we're looking forward to being able to take that forward very shortly, as soon as we're allowed to get together again, because issues as fundamental as this can't really be discussed effectively over Zoom. But the question as to why ordinary club members aren't interested in area meetings, if they've got sufficient interest in area business that they want to vote, then it does beg the question why they're not interested in going along and helping their area to achieve what the area should be doing. So the question of organisation, we're about to embark on a root and branch look at the organisation. Why we have so many directors. The articles require a minimum of 15 and a maximum of 34 directors to manage the business. That is a huge number for an organisation of 30,000 or so members. But one of the reasons which we don't allow individual votes, and we haven't done in the past, is that to do so, we would have to send out individual voting papers and copies of the accounts and copies of the budget before every AGM, and the cost of that, before we got into the realms of electronic communication, the cost of that will be astronomical, not to mention administering up to 30,000 odd results. So that's one reason it's not been addressed in the past, but now certainly this last year of electronic communication and the membership database and so on, where we're much more attuned to doing things electronically, then I think now is the time when we need to look at that very carefully, and that's certainly what we're going to do over the next few months.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Ian. Anybody else want to add further to that question?
I'd like to, as a former area representative, I'd like to certainly take Dave slightly to task with his question. Certainly when I was the area representative, I represented the views that were given to me to be to pass on, and anybody in a club, while may not be interested in attending the area meetings, they can still have a say as long as their club is sending an individual representative. I think especially now, all the areas are generally moving over to having Zoom meetings, so it's also much easier. So it's easier to get your thoughts across to the area, and then further up the structure. It does require communication in both directions. I think we're doing our bit to improve that. It requires, you know, the individual, the grassroots to engage as well. And, you know, part of the reason we do things like this more and more is to increase that engagement and to give people the opportunity to have the say.
I think just adding to that, I know there's a comment from John Collister there saying that if all members could vote and one very large club could actually gang together and get something passed, I think it would need to be an exceptionally large club probably to do that, but certainly that is one of the reasons why it's the clubs that have the vote and not the individuals.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ian. We'll move on to question 5, and this one goes back to our CAA team, and this comes from a gentleman called Chris Barker, and Chris asks, I would like to know why there is a CAA registration required for any control line models.
Yeah, that's a good question, and it's got quite a simple answer, I'm afraid, which is it's a requirement of the implementing regulation, and we cannot exempt from the implementing regulation. Below 1 kilogram, it is exempt from the implementing regulation because it's exempt as part of the basic regulation, Annex 1 of the basic regulation. But once it becomes part of the basic regulation and then therefore part of the implementing regulation, which kind of drops out of that, we are not in a position where we can change that easily. That's the bad news. And that's really a byproduct of where we are with the transition at the end of the transition period, which is now if we want to make a change like this, what is required is we, the CAA, have to approach the DFT in order for the implementing regulation to be changed. Now, that's not straightforward, and I hope everybody on the call will understand that it's probably not top of the shop of the DFT's priorities to address this particular thing. But having said that, we have begun the initial steps at trying to do this. One of the things that the team and I are constantly trying to do in everything, in all things, and this is one of them, is to maintain the proportionality. So, the reason behind this question, I fully understand, and we also understand that it seems a little bit disproportionate at the time. So we have our hands tied in some ways at the moment, and the means by which to untie them and to get something a bit more proportionate in the future is a pathway which is, unnecessary. Is, I'm afraid, a little bit more complicated than anyone would like. But that's kind of where we are. James, have you got anything else to add to that at all?
Only that we, I guess, kind of signalled our intent with this before the new regs came in. We exempted control line model aircraft of any mass. So I think we've been fairly clear with what we think is a sensible way forward. And as Kev says, we are working with DFT to try and work a solution to this, because we agree it's probably disproportionate. But it's obviously a lengthy process that we need to go through to get there.
It's been a very lengthy process because we tried to get them exempted in the basic regulation, but EASA would only go up as far as 1 kilo, but that's going back to 2015. Yeah,
you're quite right, and the basic regulation in particular, has a momentum to it which is extremely difficult to change the detail of, but it's a valid question. It's a valid aim to try and get something more proportionate, and we will work towards that. But we have to accept, obviously, the reality of the situation that we're in.
In terms of the momentum of the basic regulation, now I think it did us some favours because of the recognition that it put in for the model flying community, which is ultimately what led to EASA coming up with measures to help us.
Yeah, absolutely right. And of course, you know, recent events with the Article 16 authorization, which we've worked with you and the team to achieve, has been something which has been of, you know, something of significant pride with us in what we've been able to achieve. And we really, it's nice to recognise that, you know, I think you've said that we're the first in Europe to achieve this. So
I think we're still the only.
We're the only as well.
Yeah.
So we're the first and only. Well,
Yeah.
well, I'm sure it's not perfect, and we'll work to make it better whenever we can. And I know that we've talked about that already in the last week. We can improve it. We always can improve these things. But unfortunately, as with the control line models and working towards that solution, sometimes it does feel you take one step forward and then you have to take two back because of things like this. But we'll get there eventually.
So that's a slight spoiler alert for the guests tonight, on the basis that there are some changes afoot with Article 16, which you know, we should be seeing in the next few weeks.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and I don't want to set too many hairs running on this one, I suppose. I mean, because we've only just talked about it the last couple of days, but you know, we are looking at you know, opportunities to, I think, expand the provision of the Article 16 authorization to incorporate some more, I suppose, lenient, expansive operating conditions in terms of height and weight.
Some positive improvements for the community.
Yeah, absolutely. I like to think so, and I think that certainly some of the conversations that we've had this week with yourself, Dave, and with Rob Buckley from the large modelers, you know, are kind of have been really helpful in, you know, kind of analysing what it is that an authorization is doing. So when it comes to model aircraft displays, for example, you know, the way the legacy thinking that we've grown used to in recent years has perhaps made it slightly blurred as to what it is that we should be concentrating on in terms of our responsibilities. So we've now separated out the notion of a permission to fly above 400 feet from applying for permission to do a flying display. And, you know, there's going to be improvements in the Article 16 authorization, which is going to help clarify that and make, I think, the oversight for the safe conduct of model flying displays in the future a bit clearer for everybody involved, because I think it's been confused with getting permission to fly above 400 feet for too long.
Okay. Thank you very much, Kevin. Okay, we'll move on to the next question, and this kind of brings in everybody. And this question is from Robert Stanford. And Robert asks, I understand that I can choose to fly under CAP 722 or Article 16. This is particularly pertinent to me as I mainly fly sub 250 gram multi-rotors. Please can you clarify that my assumptions regarding insurance are correct, i.e., as long as I am flying within the law and not flying for profit, I will be covered by BMFA insurance in both scenarios. Also, do I need to make a declaration in writing prior to my flight as to which rules I am flying under?
Tim, do you want to start or shall I?
Well, I think from my point of view, it's going to be a stock answer, which is providing you're flying lawfully, then you're going to be covered by the policy. So, yeah, I think the one thing I would add to that is that obviously Hiscox are new to the BMFA and to model flying. They are involved in doing insurance for drones, so they are reasonably familiar with unmanned aircraft, so they're quite good from that point of view. One of the things I would emphasise is how much detail that Dave has provided in relation to Article 16 and the fact that we are having ongoing conversations with Hiscox all the time as things change to make sure that we don't end up in a situation where Hiscox's understanding of what the BMFA do or CAA requirements have changed and they've changed the exposure as far as they're concerned. But yes, certainly as far as I'm concerned, with all the discussions we've had with Hiscox, providing you are flying lawfully, you would be covered in either circumstance.
So one of the interesting things with this was that obviously we've been negotiating with Hiscox for a considerable period of time now. And the original negotiations and agreements that we made were based on the regulatory framework that was in place at that time. And obviously all that changed on December the 31st. So we've had to do a bit of a quick re-education job with Hiscox. But essentially what it comes down to is, provided you're operating lawfully and not for commercial purposes, you're covered either under Article 16 or in Cap 722. Anything you want to add, Kev?
No, not particularly. I think that we've probably covered everything that needs to be said on that one. If that's okay, is it okay if I just dive into the chat and just pop back to the operator ID? There's been is that allowed?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, sure.
So
Certainly.
I'm just looking in the chat now about it doesn't say the name of the chap there, from maybe Dave or Dan. The panelists did not address the question of why the operator ID was changed and nor why it's so long. I'm sorry if it didn't come across quite clearly enough. Really, the answer to both of those, i.e. why it changed and why it's so long, is the same answer, which was we had to change it because it was the law to do so. It's all to do with that implementing regulation that directs us to do this. Why exactly it was as long as it is, I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that. Is the simple answer. I saw some chat that said that meant that there was 4.5 million possible regulations numbers for everybody on Earth, and I don't dispute that. Maybe that's true, but maybe there are checksums involved with that number. I wouldn't know. I mean, James, have you got any background, or Yanni, have you got any idea as to why the number was quite so long?
It's all to do with the mathematical checksums that were involved to make sure that numbers are valid and that there's no duplication. I think there was a very long paper that IASA did on it, which has made its way into the AMC and guidance material, which is what we followed, which is why at the end of the year we had to change them all to then be compliant with that, unfortunately.
So in the EU regs, there are actually 3 additional characters, aren't there? Hidden characters for security purposes that only the operator has. And I think that's probably that's the reason we're looking at why these things are so long. I'm not an expert in this area, but we did suggest within the characters including BMFA and the member's membership number, but we might run into difficulty now if people had to change it again. So
and we all know that people would like changing it, so I think you should keep that idea to yourself, Dave, because you don't want to make people do it all again. Just to do that, but I hope I've answered the question now, and it's not a complete mystery to us, but the simple answer is that we had to do it, and the reason it's so long is probably something to do with checksums and the like. Okay,
thank you very much. Okay, we'll move on to question 7, and this one again has got an insurance base to it, so we'll throw this over to Tim before the wider panel. And this question comes from Peter Moore. Peter asks, in the light of the fact that model flying has been banned for so far this year, and that it may not resume for some time yet, would our insurers consider a reduction in our premium, perhaps in the form of a rebate next year?
Okay, so that's certainly not a question that we've asked Hiscox at this particular point. It was a question that we asked MS Amlin in about October of last year, whether, given that we had been locked down for quite a period of time, whether they would have considered a rebate. And at that time, they said it wasn't something that they would do. I think the anticipation from Hiscox is that hopefully in the next couple of months, we will be able to get back to flying. And on that basis, I think their anticipation is that we will get the majority of the main flying season when we get the better weather. So I would anticipate if we were to ask the question now, it probably would be no, because I think they anticipate that we will see a lot of flying through the summer months. If however, we don't come out of lockdown as we're anticipating, and we ended up in a situation where flying couldn't take place through the summer months, and we could realistically go back to them and say that the exposure was a lot less than anticipated, I'm sure that's a discussion that we would have with them at that time.
Okay,
Can I
thanks, Tim.
just add to that as well, Paul, if that's
Absolutely.
okay?
Just going to throw it over to the rest of the panel.
Sorry to jump in so quickly. So I think one point that just needs clarifying is that it's slightly inaccurate in that model flying hasn't been banned. Obviously, there's been restrictions around travel and group gatherings and facilities such as clubs, but a good percentage of our members fly in their own paddock behind the house. They're fully insured, so the cover has been in place all the way through. But of course, the cover is just one of a range of policies. So also you've got things like your personal accident cover, so that if you're in your workshop and you do yourself a mischief, then the cover's in place for that. If you were running your engine in your garden, you had a mishap that affected your next door neighbour, or you had a fire that affected your next door neighbour as a result of your modelling activities, then it's all covered. So there's a range of covers still in place, despite the fact that we've been in lockdown.
Okay, thanks, Paddy. Anybody else?
Only to add that I don't think any of us would expect a rebate in our car insurance because we haven't been able to drive so far as we might otherwise expect to do. So
you've got to be careful. Yeah. That my insurer gave a rebate, which I know I shouldn't say, but they did.
So did mine.
Yeah, mine did too. But we've got to remember that
considerably more premium.
Yeah. Well, it's considerably more premium, but an element of that premium is based on the mileage that you do. You know, as they ask you what your estimated mileage is, and I mean, mine's a third of what it was 2 years ago. So yes, you know, in that aspect, I'd expect a refund. I don't think the members' insurance is dependent on the number of flights because it covers so much more than you're flying, isn't it? And Manny mentioned about, you know, we did have one a couple of years ago where a fire affected the neighbour's property, and that was covered under the liability insurance, wasn't it? So it's it's been valid all the time as the insurance.
Okay, let's move on to question number 8, and this one will be aimed back at the CAA team, and probably with a little bit of support from Dave. And this question is from Kevin. Along with a gentleman called Ross, because we received similar ones, also from John Greaves and Alan Dixon. The final AAIB report 25876 into the Aluda airspeeder drone crash at Goodwood carries 15 safety recommendations. Of specific concern, item 01414 recommends that the Civil Aviation Authority adopt appropriate design, production, maintenance and reliability standards for all unmanned aircraft systems with aircraft capable of imparting over 80 joules of energy. The question being, please can the panel advise what discussion have or will take place to mitigate the consequences to RC model aircraft operations?
Yeah, it's a good question, and obviously matter of the moment for us. You know, with regard to this this unfortunate accident that happened at Goodwood in 2019. The 80 joules recommendation is obviously something that we're aware of, and as the report has come out last week, what we're in now is a 70-day phase for the CA to respond to that. And provide our kind of feedback and progress on how we're going to address those recommendations. When these recommendations arrive in the CAA, there is obviously every intention, wherever possible, to you know, service these recommendations and get them closed. And the AIB are the people who decide when these recommendations have been satisfactorily addressed. Every now and then, though, of course, you know, as you'd expect, especially when there's a number of recommendations, there will be ones that we want to just talk to the AIB a little bit more about, and this is one of them. I think it's a great question. It's one that we've thought to ourselves as well. Why was 80 joules picked? And, you know, the short answer to the question for now is that we have to speak with the AIB and just get more to the nub of why it is that they've asked this, because, you know, there are other recommendations in there, for example, that we need a little bit more clarity on ourselves as well. And the AIB are not necessarily perfect. So, for example, some of those recommendations tell us to put new guidance in cap 722. Okay, that's only one of our caps. It might be that the recommendation is better serviced if we put guidance in another one of our caps, for example. And this 80 joules recommendation is a similar situation where we've just got to go back to the AIB and just have a discussion with them and just, you know, ask them, why are you focusing on 80 joules? What's the rationale behind that?
I think they probably lifted it from the open category.
Yeah, quite possibly, yeah. But I think that the problem, and I suspect, you know, I don't know whether the gentleman or who asked this question is in the chat now, but you know, I take it that the concern here is that this feels like a disproportionate recommendation, perhaps around the corner. I don't know, but at the moment we've just got this recommendation too, and we're going to talk to the AIB about it just to get a bit more clarity. So
I think the concern is if the standards get applied to model aircraft.
Yeah, and I think that this is the conversation that needs to be had, basically because what we want to do, and like I said a bit earlier, we're very keen on making sure that things which become requirements remain proportionate to the safety risk of the operation that's being considered, and that would be my chief concern with this particular thing, is that we don't have disproportionate requirements being made of the regulated community for, you know, all the best reasons.
Okay, thank you very much, Kevin. Okay, let's move on to question number 9, and this one is going to be one aimed at Buckminster, so one for Manny and probably Ian to pick up on. Please, can you outline your plans for the development of Buckminster? Can you include a forecast for the envisaged timescale and any plans for the financing, whether internal from the membership or by grants from the Sports Council, lottery, etc.?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so it's quite a difficult one to answer, because obviously any significant development of the National Centre relies on that key element of significant funding. But we always knew that would be the case. Right from the inception of the project, we knew that we would have to a degree, rely on external funding for the bigger developments. So with that in mind, we have already explored the lottery schemes right in the early days of the project. At the time, they weren't really suitable and not paying out. But actually, we are going through a process of revisiting all that, because there has been some relaxation in the lottery funding. But when we took out the lease for the property, that was one of the main drivers as to the 35-year lease period, because most of the lottery schemes need a minimum of 25 years before you can apply. And on the funding thing, there's a separate project underway at the minute to explore the benefits of charitable status. I think the chairman may pick up on that on a later question. Of course, we always knew that there'd be the potential for bequests and donations. They've already proven of assistance. We had a reasonable bequest which helped to develop the main hangar there to the standard that it is, so that's been very helpful. So there's always the potential for a significant bequest, for example, to really move the development on. There's certainly no current plan and certainly no remit for central BMFA funds to contribute significantly to the development of the centre. I think it's really important to note that the centre is run at no direct cost to the general membership. There is an annual transfer of 10,000 made from the main BMFA budget. However, that is only if the central budget shows a surplus in excess of that 10,000 figure. So it's not a foregone conclusion that it goes across. It only goes across in certain circumstances. The day-to-day running of the centre is financed by a combination of sponsorship, donations, as we've said, and of course revenue from events, whether it's model flying events or some of the commercial bookings that we do accommodate. The centre generates a low-level surplus so far each year. I mean, you've got to bear in mind it's a fairly limited sample because we've only been fully open for 2 years, and then obviously we've had a fair bit of time compromised through lockdown. But generally, it realises a bit of a surplus, and that covers some low-level development for things like the shower block, which is going on at the minute, and there's an additional indoor space that we're developing. And it, of course, keeps the equipment up to date and new machinery and whatever. So the planning permission and a scheme is in place for the development of what was originally envisaged as the museum and visitor centre. But as I say, it really relies on a big chunk of money to move it. Of course, there's been some self-funded projects as well, which is important to note. So the tethered car track, which was finished last year and or will be in use, that was entirely self-funded by the tethered car group. And the control line circle, the hard circle, which is about, well, it's started, we're just waiting for lockdown and weather to let us get back to it. That's pretty much entirely self-funded by the control line community. So in summary, it's very difficult to put a timescale to it. Obviously, if we receive a large bequest or we can access lottery funding, that'll move it forward. And for those that do want to look at a bequest or donation, that can be done through the portal or direct to the office. And we can help with will arrangements as well. We've assisted 1 or 2 people who want to make bequests in their will. Not a very cheery subject. So in summary, it's really difficult to put a timescale to, but there is a plan in place, but it relies on additional funding.
Okay, thanks, Manny. Ian, would you like to add anything to that from
a
central
perspective? I think just to put the timescale into context, when we set this up, we didn't really know how popular it was going to be, how long it was going to take to break even, and whether it was actually in the very long term, whether it was going to be sustainable. So throwing huge amounts of money at it up front wouldn't have been a sensible use of society funds and so on. So we needed 2 or 3 years to establish that it was a viable concern, and certainly we've proven that. And I think we're now at the stage where we can start thinking more sensibly about the long term. But Manny alluded there to the charitable issue, and that's a question that's going to come up in a few minutes' time. And I think it's worthwhile just expanding on that and how that would potentially relate to Buckminster. And I'll come on to that in a few minutes after the next couple of questions.
Thank you very much, Ian. Okay, let's move on to question 10, and we'll try and get our money's worth out of the CAA while we've got them here. And another very popular question from those that got in touch. Will something be put in place for mutual recognition of registration and remote pilot competence when flying in Europe, and for European pilots when they come to the UK?
Okay, yeah, thanks for that question. So there are kind of 2 areas to consider on this one: registration and competence. So most other countries require registration for their own systems, and as sovereign states, obviously that'll need to be respected. Article 16 authorizations, you can't use those abroad; it's for UK only. And pilot competence, the UK needs to ask for recognition under Article 41 from a third country. We've not undertaken to do that yet. The mutual recognition discussion is a bit of a double-edged sword for us, and I'll explain what I mean by that. In that, it does obviously work both ways. And one of the problems that we're starting to reconcile with colleagues in third countries, EASA, is the problems that come with mutual recognition, which may be quite profound in terms of disproportionate requirements, which are then made upon the likes of yourselves if we seek that mutual recognition. So with the separation from Europe and EASA, there is opportunity for us to simplify and diverge and to act with more proportion in our regulation. That's the good news. The bad news is things like this, which you will see there is, well, if you're going to go abroad, you have to abide when in Rome. I'm afraid at the moment, you're going to have to just abide by those systems. But the good news about that is that EASA and the European member states of EASA are not in a position to over-influence the requirements that are made of the regulated community in this country anymore, because we're able to diverge and simplify more easily. And we've started to do those kind of things already. So perhaps for the sake of this question, not exactly the answer you would want, but is a work in progress. But we have to be able to strike the right kind of balance, because whilst it might be an excellent idea to get what you want as you leave this country, we've got to consider what will then happen on the reciprocal when other member state operators want to operate in the UK, and we want to make sure that that's safe enough too.
So in terms of pilots from overseas visiting the UK, we have got some mechanisms within the Article 16 authorisation that make that fairly painless.
Yeah, for sure.
And what we're trying to do is work with our colleagues throughout Europe on their Article 16 authorisations to make sure they build something similar into theirs. So whilst there isn't a reciprocal arrangement at member state level, if it can be incorporated into the various different Article 16s, it should certainly make things easier. Unfortunately, obviously there will be a requirement to register as an operator and take the competency, I think, in the first country that you visit. I think it's something like that. And we have got some information on the European Model Flying Union website, which we're collating from all the different member states, which members could have a look at to see what the requirements are in countries that they may be intending to visit. On another matter, I saw a question pop up a minute or two ago about remote ID requirements and whether models would be exempted from them. But I think it's fair to say that the remote ID requirements are future requirements within the implementing reg. So they didn't pass into UK law at the end of the transition on the 31st of December. So at this moment in time, there are no legal requirements for remote ID. It's not to say that it won't crop up, but my understanding is that at this moment in time, the EU requirements haven't been transferred into UK law.
Yeah, that's correct. So the requirement for the green flashing light was one, and remote ID was the other.
Yeah.
Didn't quite make its way across into the UK version of the IR. So that's not the case for the specific category, which is what that applied to. We expect it may become a requirement if DFT want to reintroduce it, but that's something that needs to happen at DFT level rather than at our level.
I think, as Kev said earlier, they're a little bit busy at the moment with other matters, so maybe not something for 2021.
Yeah, I would imagine if it is a requirement, it probably won't get in at the end of this year, probably next year if it is, but yeah.
So there's still plenty of time to argue and negotiate and debate it.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's the process that we will be engaged with DFT.
I like the way you put argument or debate. Anyway, moving on to question 11 then. This one directed more towards our equipment and probably with, well, definitely with an insurance tilt. So again, one from Manny and probably Tim. This comes from David Ebden. Can you confirm insurance cover when fixed wing RC models are flown with differing, although advertised as compatible, manufacture of radio and receiver equipment? For example, using a Futaba transmitter with a Free Sky receiver.
Tim, do you want to give a stock answer and then I'll elaborate briefly?
Stock answer is going to be provided with flying legally. Yeah, you're covered. But I know we've had this question in the past, and I think that when we do get asked questions like this, I do also always come back and refer to Manny, because I think we have perhaps in the past had this question before and perhaps give their wrong answer. But yeah, as far as I'm concerned, providing it's legal, it's covered.
Yeah, so exactly that. The insurance doesn't make any stipulation on the equipment that you're using other than you're acting lawfully. In terms of receivers, there's very little in legislation that directs you on receivers. It's more about fitness for purpose. So it's more about air law, if anything. You've got to use equipment that keeps you in compliance with your requirement not to endanger your personal property. So In terms of mix and match equipment, no problem at all, is the simple answer.
You just got to be careful which one you choose for your 100 kilo multi-roads.
Fitness for purpose, yeah, exactly right. If you're using a micro servo on your 100cc model, then that's not fit for purpose. Okay.
Okay, thanks very much, Manny and Tim. Okay, let's move on to question 12. And this one is directed towards Andy with a club focus, but I may well chip in on this one. Peter Mosley asks, has the BMFA considered creating an active and ongoing focus on generating and highlighting ways that clubs could best advertise and promote our hobby? So helping clubs attract new members more efficiently and in greater numbers than appears to currently be the case.
Thank you, Paul. Yes, indeed, we have. We have considered it, and we have taken a fair few steps down the road. We've been working on a number of projects to do with club PR, especially since Paul's come on board with his expertise, which is vast, I should say. We have improved our resources. I've just put a link in the chat box now to our club PR website, which has got a lot of information on there in terms of what you can do. There's a guide that you can download. And we did a webinar a month or so ago as well, which you can also watch on YouTube, where we discussed the various elements of how to promote your club. Because ultimately, I mean, we're fairly certain, myself and Paul and the rest of the team, that clubs are the primary driver for membership as we go forward. We've 800 plus clubs. If each club could pull in 1 or 2 new members every year, we've got membership growing again, which is obviously where we want it to be. And we're doing everything we can, and we will continue to support clubs to attract members, either through website, assistance with social media, various bits and pieces, helping with club events. We are here to support you. And as one of Paul's projects, which sadly was kiboshed a little bit by the pandemic last year, is Flight Fest, which I'll pass over to Paul to elaborate on.
Okay, thanks, Andy. Going back to what you've just said about the nearly 800 clubs, in the sort of short time that I've been helping the BMFA, what has become perfectly clear is what a handful of people can do from a central location. If we can get all 800 plus clubs doing exactly the same and multiplying that, the benefits are there for all to see. Also, what's quite clear, and again, the recent survey has also highlighted this, and that is 80% of the BMFA members, or I think the actual stats was 84%, of all members have come into the sport, hobby, pastime, by being introduced either by a family member that was a model flyer, or a friend that was also a model flyer. So there's no better advert for our sport than ourselves. Literally, as we look at, obviously, everybody on the BMFA panel, we're all passionate modelers. Yet talk to all of us, and we've all been introduced to it through friends, family members. We didn't just fall into the hobby. So it really goes back to the criticalness of the club network. Hence why myself and Andy have been working quite heavily on putting sort of resources together. Going on to Flight Fest, hopefully you've all heard about it, or your club has certainly considered being part of it for this year, and I believe Andy's earmarked that for September. Is that right, Andy?
Yes, well, I mean, previous years we've aimed for May, haven't we? But I think, as we all understand, in the current situation, that's probably not going to be possible this year. But we are looking for September this year, because we feel by then, all being well, there's opportunities to invite people down to your flying sites. Because ultimately, we feel that the best way to get somebody involved is to get them along, get them on the transmitter, actually flying the aircraft. And the times, the events we ran at Buckminster doing that, you know, have pulled in members. Clubs that have done the Flight Fest events previously have also pulled in a good number of members. So it's an ideal way for clubs to, you know, reach out and find the new blood.
Yeah.
So yes, September, we're hoping that lots of clubs will come on board and run an event and get people having a go.
I think, as you just pointed out, from the Flight Fest we held, was it the first one, May 2019? Was that correct? I'm losing track of years at the moment with the pandemic. And of course, last year didn't happen, but every single club involved in Flight Fest, and we only had a small number, benefited and gained new members. And I think there was one on the PR webinar. Did they mention they gained 12 through it, along with also PR social media activity? And I hope to do a write-up in the BMFA news over that. But again, what's clear, and I've been talking to one of the clubs today, and if you follow the official BMFA Facebook page, you'll have seen a post in regards to a club that's been very active since that webinar, and the benefits that they brought. So there is clear benefit to going through it. And let's just pop that link up in the chat to the oh, there we go, the BMFA fly trying one as well, to the PR website, and in there is a guide that we produced. And the simple fact, if all clubs start at page 1 and work their way through to, I believe it's around about page 15 or 16, and follows each of those steps, I can pretty much guarantee you will, well, you'll certainly raise your profile within your local community. And I'd be absolutely gobsmacked if you didn't gain new members, because all of the clubs that have engaged us and gone down that path simply have. So as I see it, myself and Andy's job now is to scale that up. Instead of being a handful of clubs that are working through that program, is we get as many as possible going through it. Anything else you'd like to add?
I've just dropped the link to the official Facebook page into the chat, not to be confused with various other Facebook groups. And there is the post that Paul put on earlier today about Epping and North Weald Model Flying Club. Take a look. Romeo at Epping has been very proactive. You'll also be reading about them in the next edition of the news. I just want to go back at one of the chat points there that Stuart Maunders has put in. It says, does the club support officer also support country members? That's a resounding yes as well. Part of my role involves dealing with local authorities and various other bodies in relation to public flying sites. For example, in Bristol, who introduced a bylaw a couple of years ago that effectively prevented model flying at all public sites apart from one. A trip down there, and we soon got a couple more sites recognised, and also a commitment from them to look at any sites in their area, and if it's suitable, to add it to the list of appropriate sites. So yes, very much so, I would say, is that.
If I can just touch on, is it Ray Wells, I believe? Yeah, Ray Wells. How much take-up has there been on the trying out of model flying? On that first Flight Fest we held, like I say, back in May 2019, which was literally a taster, as it were. I believe it was 13, is that right, Andy? 13 clubs held a Flight Fest, and every single one of them gained at least a member. Others saying that, like I say, there was one that quoted they gained 12 through the period. So obviously that was only a handful of clubs, but imagine if we scaled that up to all 800 clubs across the country doing exactly the same thing. If we could hold a Flight Fest once a year, twice a year, that suddenly becomes not just a handful of people, it suddenly becomes 500 people, it becomes 800, it becomes 1,000 people. And it's all down to us. We've all got the same passion to go flying, and we've just got to instill that into our friends and our family and our local communities, and drive that forward. As for the Try Flying website, Andy will have an idea on how many people, even through lockdown, have been in touch trying to book a free trial flight. And
it's a daily occurrence that there's a request comes in for a trial flight, even through lockdown. So it does work, and it is a way for you to get your club out there and you know, people in. Just pick up a point that John Collister's raised a couple of times in there, saying a lot of clubs are full. Some clubs are full, but the majority aren't. So, and you know, if they get proactive, they can pull in new members, and it's what we all want to see.
Okay.
Just chip in a couple of points there.
Sorry,
just for information, largely, when we were doing our strategic review, one of the things we looked at was the club profiles. An interesting point is that more than a third, more than 300 of our clubs have fewer than 20 members. So we do appreciate that there's no one size fits all for clubs. We've got about 40 clubs that are over 100, between 100 and 200, but the vast majority of the clubs are actually relatively small. The other thing that came out, looking at memberships, and it's an area that we don't really pick up on, and I noticed this when I was invited to the British Gliding Association annual dinner and prize giving last year, and that is they have a very, very active university clubs organisation. And I was looking at our stats. It's not really well known, but we actually have a student membership category that's not well publicised, and that's for junior members going on to higher education, and they can continue to pay a lower fee whilst they're in full-time education. And we have only a very small handful of those. So I think that's an area which we can perhaps tap into, and it's something that when we get together for take our strategic review further forward, we'll need to pursue that, particularly with so many universities now developing into UAVs and so on. If we can capture them and bring some of them within the fold, then I think that would be very valuable.
I'm going to pipe up again. There's a few of the attendees pointing out that they have got room in their club for new members. A great way of pulling new members in that's proven to work is providing me with a club profile for the magazine, which has two benefits. One, it will almost certainly pull you in new members, and two, it saves me having to write so much pushed up against a deadline. So by all means, get those into me and we'll get those published for you.
Okay, thanks, Andy. Right, we'll move on to question 13 then, and this one's going to be directed for our Chief Exec, and this comes from John Collister. John asks, assuming there will have to be some changes made to the BMFA Members Handbook to take into account Article 16, do you have a timescale for when the handbook will be up to date with the latest legislation?
Yeah. There are some significant changes required to the handbook, that's for certain. And in terms of the timescale, the CAA guys that are on your screen are pushing me to have everything in place and all our ducks in a row, and that includes the handbook, by the end of March. So that's the sort of timescale that we're working to. So hopefully by the end of March, it will all be updated and refreshed and current. And then the plan is that it will be a live document on the website, and there'll probably be an app for it as well that Andy's working on. And it will be maintained in an up-to-date state. So we'll not be waiting several years between printed versions. It will always be kept up to date on the website.
Can I build a little bit on that answer, Dave, if I may, which is obviously to recognise the hard work that you've put in, towards this point. And it's always assuring to come to a meeting such as this and to see these sort of questions being asked. And I mean that in the sense that it's good that the grassroots members are asking you for this kind of timeline, and there's an appetite for this. And I think it's really supporting of a couple of points that I really wanted to make, which is about this, and also links to the impact of the Alauda report and the previous question about what that means and what impacts it could mean. Because what you've just been talking about is one of those impacts, which is to bring the BMFA bang up to scratch with the requirements for the Article 16 authorization. So I think when it comes to the Alauda report, there are two things to take away in particular. And and that's not just for the people who have got their faces on the screen. I think this is for everybody who's on the call. And the first of those is that last week, I and the team sent out a reminder to all authorization holders of the importance of flying within the conditions of the authorization. Now, one of the conditions of your authorization, which is the Article 16 authorization, is to have that paperwork up to date. The other point, as well as remaining within the conditions of your authorization, is the importance of reporting and occurrence reporting. And one of the reasons that I agreed to come here tonight to talk to you all was because I recognize the BMFA as being a center of excellence for the way that unmanned aircraft should be flown and operated within the UK. And what I'm looking for is a champion, if you will, who is going to show the rest of the unmanned aircraft community who are less good, let's say, on how things should be done. So I think that this is a Class 1 opportunity for the BMFA to prove its value in this sense, in remaining within the conditions of its authorization and reporting when necessary. So I fully recommend the guidance that's in CAP 722 section 2.9, which is about occurrence reporting, and for every one of us to make sure that we're familiar with what that requirement is, because it is vital that you as an engaged air safety culture organization have a reporting culture. And I know there may be opinion out there about reporting, for example, which is it's all about a bit of a witch hunt and allocating blame. And I really want to make the point crystal clear that it is not about that. And we say the same in CAP 722. It is not there to attribute blame. It is there to identify lessons. And it's also there to demonstrate an engaged air safety culture. So if you only remember one thing that I say tonight, please, it's about remaining within the authorization, the conditions of which, and tippity top is the importance of a reporting culture. And I really am optimistic, got my fingers crossed, that the BMFA are going to be leading from the front when it comes to improving the engaged air safety culture of unmanned aircraft across the UK, because to be frank, there's a little bit of a problem with reporting at the moment, and I need to get it improved.
So we're
tribes. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no, we are looking at a system to make it as easy as possible for members to report occurrences. There's still a bit of work to do in terms of clarifying what the requirements will be with the AIB.
Yeah.
And at the present time, they're content for us to continue as we had, where we're only reporting serious incidents involving injuries to third parties or conflict with manned aviation at this moment in time, but they're carrying out their own review as well.
Yeah.
So it may be that ultimately our requirements, in terms of the AIB at least, are slightly different to those that are contained within CAP 722.
Yeah, I mean, the guidance is in CAP 722, and that is the basis on which the Article 16 authorization is obviously based. So please do get involved with that. I welcome any feedback or suggestions. And certainly, there is, when it comes to occurrence reporting, there are two drivers. It's what the CAA want, and then there is also a requirement about what the AIB want. They are a little bit different, and there's a couple of flowcharts in there that explain that. And it's important that everybody on the call who's planning to fly and may have a requirement to report understands that it's about learning. It's not about a witch hunt, but also they need to understand the reporting requirement. And if anybody's not clear on that, then of course, we're here to help make that as clear as possible. So,
of course, we have an additional requirement that rolls into that as well, and that's in terms of reporting for the benefit of the insurers.
Yeah, completely.
And it's all going to be tied into the same process. That's the plan.
Yeah, but the BMFA are beginning to demonstrate the qualities of an engaged air safety culture in bigger handfuls now, and I want to maintain the momentum and the relationship that we're building up with this regard to use you guys as the demonstration of how things should be done. And when it comes to occurrence reporting, that's top of my list.
One of the things we're looking at for that is a guided online process for members. So if it may be that they're not sure whether it's a reportable occurrence, but they can simply go through an online system and it will guide them, and at the end of it give them information, potentially even file the report there and then, depending on what we can tie up together, but certainly leave them with the information that yes, this needs reporting to the AAIB, yes, it needs reporting to the CAA, and yes, it needs reporting for insurance purposes.
So it's something that we'll be discussing with you in the near future.
Of course, I look forward to that, and I'll be eating the sandwich from the other end, if I can use that analogy. With there's an intelligence function within the CEA, and the ECARES portal has got some problems with it, and we're looking to resolve that when we're able to use a UK version of it, which is one of those benefits from having left EASA that we can rewrite. So we're working on that to remove those barriers, and anything that you can do from your end clearly is most welcome as well.
Yeah, because it doesn't look like a particularly friendly or relevant process from the model flyers point of view. So we'd like to come up with something that's a little bit more user-friendly and relevant. Of
course. I like to think, but I'm happy to be challenged, that it's a proportionate requirement from the CAA. I won't speak for the AIB. They're a separate organisation. They've got their own requirements. But I like to think that what we've designed in consultation with you during Article 16 as well, where we tried it out, we've got a proportionate requirement for reporting.
And the other thing is that these aren't new requirements, are they?
No, they're not,
existing requirements.
No, it's just that we've kind of unpacked them a bit more clearly. There is no new stuff in here, really. We've just done our best to try and explain it more fully to those that need to know, because I think we've owed it to you for a while to do a better job of explaining it. We've now had a go. So certainly welcome feedback from anyone on the call to, as to how good a job we've done on that.
Okay, thank you very much, Jennifer. Right, let's move on to question 14. And this one is more focused around the BMFA structure. So we'll probably throw this over to Ian initially. And this comes from Peter Johnson. Charitable status would provide much benefit to the BMFA. What progress is being made in negotiation with such status?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. I'll come on to that in a moment. If I could just go back to the question of two previous, because there's a couple of comments come up on the bulletin board there about club membership, and a couple of guys saying that someone's chairman of a club with 100 and they only have a small fraction of them who fly regularly. Just a thought perhaps for clubs would be to consider, like the airlines do, and take the risk at overbooking the number of members you take on, bearing in mind if you know how many are actually going to use the field regularly. So perhaps that's just a thought. Coming on to charitable status, very simple to stay, and it's a common misconception, I think, that it's a straightforward and a beneficial process. It's something that BMFA has looked at before. It was about 10 years ago or so. It was looked at in great detail by the chief executive, and we got as far as drawing up a business plan and draft terms of the organisation and so on, looking at both we didn't have the national centre then, obviously, but looking at the association, and also the terms of community amateur sports clubs, which, if you look at the Charities Commission website, that's another option. The difficulty with all of these is that they are, and the Charities Commission is very strict on what is deemed charitable. And if you look at what we do, there are only small elements of our business which could be deemed charitable. To be charitable, an activity must be for the public benefit, and it must be for the benefit of a wide enough section of the community to be recognised and appropriate for a charitable status. We looked at this again last year. It was a proposal from one of our areas came in that we should look at it, particularly with respect to Buckminster. And this was largely based on experience in America, where the AMA, their communal site at Muncie is run as a charity, but the regulations over there are very much different from ours. look and the prime reason, the prime driver for that was that it would encourage more people to make donations because it would have a taxable benefit. Again, that's one of the issues that the Charities Commission is very hot on in this country, and that is that if you form a charity purely for tax benefits purposes, then they will not approve it. So we looked at what elements of our business potentially could be charitable, and it boils down largely to education and heritage. And if you look at the Royal Aero Club Trust, the Royal Aero Club has a charitable trust, and that's two of the three key elements that they have taken over. And actually, the Royal Aero Club Charitable Trust benefits our members because a number of our juniors have actually benefited from their bursaries. So I think that's something that we do need to be well aware of. But as to whether we should set up our own system in parallel, there are a number of issues. The first one is setup costs. Charities cost money to run. You have to provide the staff, you have to run the accounts. It's run very much as a business, and the constraints are even tighter than running a business. So it has to be done properly. And then there's the financial risk. If we, as the BMFA, were to create a charity and put money into it, there's no guarantee that the charity is going to be sustainable in the long term. And that, again, that's one of the requirements of the Charities Commission, particularly if it's reliant purely on donations as income. And perhaps the most significant one is the lack of control, or the loss of control by us as a business or as a community of those activities, because they would be handed over entirely to the trustees. So if we were to form, for example, a national centre were to become a charity, then the BMFA as such wouldn't have control of what went on there. So we had a study running for the last 12 months. They've been looking at that in detail, and the conclusion of that, bearing in mind the current circumstances we're in, with membership reducing over the last 3 or 4 years, and that's something that really is a priority for us to address, that the time at the moment isn't right to consider forming a charity. Although our articles do permit it, the conclusion of the executive and the council is that the time at the moment, wouldn't be in our best interests to do it. So hopefully that answers the question. It sounds very good in principle, but the practicalities of it don't suggest that there will be the benefits that one might expect.
Okay. Thanks for clearing that up then, Ian.
Yeah.
Thank you. Anyway, looking at the time, we're coming up on 9 o'clock, and we initially said we'd run for an hour, but we've gone well into an hour and a half, so that's great. So I'm going to wind things up for the evening with the hope that we can do this again and cover more questions that haven't been answered. But the final one of the evening, and probably the one that over and above how long the CAA number, the operator number length is, probably the other most popular question is, COVID permitting, is there going to be nationals this year for 2021? And if there are, when are they going to be, and where are they going to take place? So, Team BMFA, over to you guys.
You're muted, Andy.
You're that.
Oh.
Yeah, I ought to start.
That was so much better.
It had to happen at some point, didn't it? Yeah. Yes. First of all, are the Nats scheduled for 2021? When and where? Yes. We have to remember that the national championships are a lot more than just the Power Nationals in August. But I suspect that was the driver behind the question when it came in. Currently, we are planning towards holding the Power Nationals at Barkston Heath in August Bank Holiday weekend as normal, COVID permitting. But it's not just COVID permitting, it's RAF permitting. And that's the ultimate yes or no. We have approached through the good offices of our chairman the RAF, and we're waiting for their initial response as to whether it's something that is possible for this year. We very much hope it is. Those of us that have been involved for a number of years missed it. We didn't necessarily miss picking up litter at 6 o'clock on the Tuesday morning in the rain, but we certainly missed the Nationals. It's very much part of our lives when we're heavily involved in it. So we are working towards it, but we just cannot say for definite at the moment that we can. The RAF may just turn around and say, no, it's not possible this year. It depends what conditions they put on us. You know, fingers crossed, we very, very much want to. We will make an announcement when we know for definite. That's all we can say on that. If we can't do the Power Nationals as normal, I'm very, very certain that the national championships for the various different disciplines will still take place one way or another. Ian might be able to elaborate a little bit more on this one.
Yeah, I mean, as far as Cranwell are concerned, it's a question of treading carefully and being careful what we ask for and getting the timing right. Because if we then approach them too early, the only answer they could give would be no, and then it would be very difficult to go back on. So we've been just awaiting the final clarification of the lockdown time scale. My experience of Cranwell over the Christmas period, and this was on behalf of the Grantham and District Model Aircraft Society, who are the resident club at Barkston Heath, and normally Cranwell are very accommodating, and when they close down full-size flying for Christmas and New Year, they normally allow the club access for the bulk of that period. But prior to the full lockdown that came in after Christmas, the view of the station safety cell was that even though Barkston is 1.5 miles long, they would still only allow 6 people on the airfield. So that gave us certainly the impression that the management at Cranwell is cautious. So we're looking at various options for the August Nationals. We certainly will be hopeful of the full Monty, but we have to consider possible contingencies that they might say, yes, you can have the airfield for the contests, but you can't have any public, or you can have day gates, but you can't have any camping because showers aren't permissible, etc. So we're considering all the options, but the first stage is to get approval in principle. And what the executive agreed with Andy as our new coordinator is that our final no-go date will be the 1st of June. So we're keeping, unless Cranwell come back with a definite no, then we're keeping all our options open until the 1st of June. Is that fair to say, Andy?
Yeah, absolutely. I think much beyond that, it's just not physically possible to get everything arranged, is it? So, no, absolutely.
It's possible we might be able to get something on there for free flight nats at the end of May. Again, it's dependent on interpretation of the rules, where it's considered, if it's considered as a sports event endorsed by the national governing body, which we are, then it's possible that it may be permissible. But if it is, I suspect it will be probably day gate only and no camping, but that's speculation at the moment. We'll wait and see what Cranwell come back with.
I think while we're talking about COVID precautions, Ray Cox has put a comment in. When are we going to issue guidance to clubs regarding the new phased release of lockdown requirements? As soon as we know what they actually are is the answer. Whenever the government has changed the restrictions that are in place, they release a statutory instrument, which is always a bit of a challenge and not a fun day reading through it and deciphering what the actual regulations are. So we would rather take our time and get the right message out than rush a statement out. We will be communicating with the DCMS and you can expect a statement once we know for certain what we can and can't do. Based on the roadmap, it certainly looks like that clubs will be able to open at the end of March, assuming everything goes according to plan. And there may be some scope for model flying from the 8th of March onwards. But as I said, until we actually see what the statutory instrument says, we can't be certain on anything. But as soon as we are, we will put a statement out.
Good. Thank you very much, Andy, and everybody else on the panelist, and our special guests, Tim, and obviously James, Kevin, and Yanni. Really appreciate your time tonight, gentlemen. And judging by all of the various different comments that are coming through, it looks as though it's been a resounding success, and your time has been very much appreciated. So, but most importantly, not forgetting all of the 300 or so people that have joined us tonight. Hopefully, all of them have enjoyed it as much as the people leaving messages in the chat. And it certainly looks as though round 2 will be coming soon. So thanks once again. And I'll hand you back over to our housekeeper, Andy Simons.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, I think apologies if we haven't covered a question that you particularly wanted an answer to. We, as I say, we had many more questions submitted, but in the time allotted, which we initially said an hour, we've already ran over by half an hour.